Chapter 1. The Quarrel of Achilles and Agamemnon. At dawn's pale edge, the Greek camp above Troy stirred with more than the restless drumming of war. The air was thick with bitterness. For nearly 10 years, the armies of Grisichians, as they called themselves, had battered the walls of King Priam's city, and what had begun as a quest to reclaim a stolen queen had devolved into something darker, something touched by the pride and wrath of men and gods alike. In the center of the camp, where tension beat like a war drum, a quarrel flared, one so fierce that it would alter the fate of mortals and gods. Achilles, best of the Greeks, stood tall in bronze armor, his eyes alight with fury. Across from him, King Agamemnon, commander of all Achaean forces, drew himself up to his full, imperious height. The cause, not glory in battle, but the spoils of war. Brises, a prize hard won, and a symbol of honor. The trouble had begun when Apollo, god of light and plague, rained arrows of pestilence upon the Greeks. The seer Calchas, white-haired and wise, declared the plague would end only if Agamemnon returned, Chryse's daughter, of the priest Chryses, whom Agamemnon had claimed as a prize to her father. Humiliated and angry, Agamemnon agreed, but in his rage, he demanded compensation. "You strip me of my rightful prize," Agamemnon shouted, his voice carrying over the tension-strained air. "I will not return Chryses without taking something of equal value. If need be, I will take the girl Brises from Achilles himself." A stunned silence fell. Achilles, muscles coiled, face burning, shot back, dog-faced, shameless. "How do you dare rob me, after all the blood I've spilled for your cause? Never again will I fight at your side, not while you trample all honor." The entire camp, from cunning Odysseus to mighty Ajax, felt the universe tilt, for the Greeks' new division between their two greatest leaders could only spell disaster. Agamemnon, proud and unyielding, did not relent. With a curt nod, he summoned guards. "Go to Achilles' tent and bring Brises to me. Achilles must know what it is to cross the will of kings." Achilles nearly drew his sword, his fingers itched for battle, heart pounding with the urge to strike down the king who wronged him. But from the heavens, Athena, bride goddess of wisdom, intervened. Her invisible hand pressed upon his shoulder, her whispered words for his ear alone. "Restrain yourself, son of Peleus. Let your grievance fester, for the gods have a plan beyond your fury." Trembling with rage, Achilles lowered his hand, glaring with acid words instead of steel. "One day, Agamemnon, you will beg for my help, and I will not come." And in those words, prophecy. For with the taking of Brises, not only was a woman torn from her home, but the will of the greatest of Greek heroes was broken. That night, under the cloak of stars, Achilles stalked to the shore of the wind-dark sea. Bitter tears slid down his face stairs, for pride wounded, friendship betrayed, and a glory that felt suddenly hollow. He lifted his hands and called to his mother, the sea goddess, Thetis, asking her to speak with Zeus himself. "Grant honor to your son, mother. Let the Greeks know regret. Let suffering come, so they remember who I am." Thus began the chain of wrath and sorrow, whose echo would shape the war's end. Chapter 2. Calchas, Prophecy, and the Plague on the Greeks. The camp at Troy was a tapestry of conflict and weariness. No sooner had one quarrel begun to settle than another crisis rose, driven by disease and divine anger. Even the mightiest warriors felt Apollo's invisible hand as sickness stalked their ranks, fevers that burned men from within, wounds festering, voices whispering of doom in the night. It was not luck or misfortune, but the power of the gods at play. Chryses, priest of Apollo, had come to the Greek camp, his arms outstretched with rich gifts and endless prayers to ransom back his daughter, Chryses, captive in Agamemnon's tent. He begged with all a father's love and a holy man's dignity, but Agamemnon, hardened by years of siege, rejected him with sneering contempt. Enraged, Chryses called upon Apollo, god of the silver bow, whose arrows never missed their mark. For 9 days, the god walked the Greek camp in shadows, loosing his deadly shafts. Silent, unseen, yet no one could escape. Men sickened, dogs whimpered, mules fell dead in the fields. Soon the pyres were burning day and night, and the air was thick with the reek of death. Fear swept through ranks of warriors. They grumbled in their tents. They demanded answers from their leaders. At last, the council gathered white-bearded Nestor, fierce-eyed Diomedes, cunning Odysseus, and all the great captains. But it was Achilles, his pride still burning from Agamemnon's insult, who called for Calchas, the prophet. Calchas, always wary of angering kings, stepped forward only after Achilles spoke words of protection. "Fear not, Calchas. Speak the truth, whatever it may cost. I will stand by you." The seer closed his eyes, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. Apollo is angry for the disrespect shown to his priest Chryses. Only by returning the maiden, Chryses, without ransom, and offering a sacred sacrifice, can the god's wrath be cooled. The longer we wait, the more lives lost. Agamemnon's anger swelled. So I alone am the cause of all these deaths. And if I return this girl, do I go without a prize, while all of you feast on spoils won with my leadership? One of you must give up your own prize, if I am to lose mine. Murmurs rustled through the circle, but Achilles, never one to mince words, met Agamemnon's scowl with his own. None of us would refuse you a prize in time, but you must put aside your greed, king. This is about the fate of every man in this camp, not just your pride. The council turned tense, the air knife sharp with outrage and fear. But Nestor, keeper of ancient wisdom, stepped between the two lions before the camp could shatter outright. "Remember, my sons, that unity is our shield and our only hope against Troy's mighty walls. Achilles, do not challenge the king's authority. Agamemnon, do not provoke the best of our warriors. There is still time for pride to bow before necessity." Grudgingly, Agamemnon agreed. "Take the girl, but know this, I will send my men to claim another, even from you, Achilles, so I am not seen." As Chryses was led to her father, under the solemn gaze of Apollo's priests, the camp's hope flickered to life. Prayers climbed up to Olympus, smoke from burnt offerings curling toward the gods as priests washed the blood from their hands, and men waited for the fever to break. For now, the Greeks could breathe easier. Apollo, appeased, turned his bow away. But a different kind of sickness had already settled in the hearts of their leaders. Achilles stalked to his tent, wrath simmering deeper, isolated by betrayal and insult. And in his absence, the Greeks would feel his loss on the battlefield. That night, beneath the same stars that shone over Troy, the Greek camp found only uneasy sleep. For the old wounds between warriors and kings would never truly heal in. In the silence, the gods watched, waiting to see whose pride would shape the end of men. Chapter 3. Achilles withdraws. Thetis appeals to Zeus. Dawn lit the Achaean camp in a pale, uncertain glow. And for the first time since their arrival at Troy, the air seemed thinner, as if the gods themselves were holding their breath. The pestilence had faded, and the pyres grew cold, but healing was a thin veil masking wounds that ran far deeper than flesh. In the heart of the Greek lines, pride and pain edged every word, for a rift had opened that no medicine, not even of the gods, could mend. Standing outside his tent, Achilles watched Agamemnon's heralds turn, Talthybius and silent Eurybates approach in the gray morning mist. Their task was bitter and thankless. Take Brise's Achilles' prize by order of the king. Achilles watched them come with a chilling calm. All the anger from days before still simmered under his skin, yet he did not rage as they feared he would. Instead, with a voice as cold as winter's steel, he ordered his friend Patroclus, "Bring Brise's out, friend. They do not come for her by their own will, but by the king's command." Patroclus brought the girl, her eyes shadowed by sorrow. Achilles spoke gently to her, his voice losing some of its harsh edge. "Go where you must. It is not you who has caused this quarrel, but men who think themselves gods." And so Briseis departed, her tears unnoticed by most, but not by the son of Peleus. As the heralds led her through the camp, a hush fell over the warriors. Many watched in silence, feeling the cost of pride. For the Greeks had lost more than a prize, they had lost their hope. In the silence afterward, Achilles retreated to the shore. Alone, he knelt beside the restless sea, his mother's element. No one had seen the hero cry before, but now tears ran freely down his face, salt as the water lapping at his feet. He raised his hands and called out, his voice raw with grief and rage. "Mother, if ever you listened to me as a child, if ever you wrapped your arms around me and promised that I was worthy of honor, hear me now. Pray to Zeus, father of gods and men, let him tilt the balance of war, so the Greeks suffer loss after loss, until Agamemnon begs me, but too late for his pride to save him." From the depths came Thetis, the gleaming sea goddess, mournful and radiant, rising through the waves like a memory of hope. She gazed upon her son, his pain written clear as day. Kneeling beside him, Thetis enfolded Achilles, brushing aside his golden hair. "My child, why do you weep here in agony, bent by sorrow greater than your years? Your honor is wounded, not by enemies, but by your own countrymen. But do not despair. I will speak with Zeus at the highest peak of Olympus. For you, I will ask that the Greeks remember your worth with every cost paid in blood." With those words, mother and son mourned together, man and goddess, chained by love and the doom spun by the fates. Thetis departed, vanishing into the sea with a promise and a purpose. As the day spread over Troy and the Greek camp, Thetis prepared herself. She rose upward, climbing invisible to mortal eyes, until at last she reached Olympus, where the gods feasted and thundered. Zeus, father of gods, sat alone brooding, mighty and tangled in the affairs of gods and men. Thetis knelt before him, her beauty as dazzling as dawn on the water's edge. "Son of Kronos," she pleaded, "grant my son the honor he deserves. Turn the tide against the Greeks for a time. Let them learn wisdom through loss, so they may once again call on Achilles with respect, not contempt." Zeus listened, nodded, and at last replied, "So be it. Trouble will come to the Greeks, and Agamemnon will taste the bitterness of regret. But know this: when the will of gods collide, mortal suffering follows. With Zeus's oath, the fate of armies was set on a darker course. That night in camp, Achilles swore he would fight no more, not until Agamemnon came to him, humbled by ruin. The best of the Greeks removed himself from battle, and the silence in his tent was heavier than any storm. All through the night, The gods looked down upon Troy and the beaches below, waiting. The air grew thick with omens, for every prideful choice would have its price. The wheels of doom were turning, and none would escape unchanged. Chapter 4. Paris and the Duel with Menelaus. High above the plain of Troy, the sun cast long shadows upon the blood-stained earth. For weeks, the war had raged, with neither side yielding, yet the greatest battle was not decided by the clash of armies, but by the will of men and the caprice of the gods. Within the city's mighty walls, Paris, the prince of Troy and the cause of this bitter war, peered from a high balcony. His shoulders were strong, his face as handsome as any sculpted idol, but his heart beat uncertain, and like his warrior brother Hector, Paris was known more for beauty than bravery. And for a single woman, Helen the queen, he'd whisked away from her Greek husband, Menelaus, the world had burst into flames. Menelaus, red-haired and fierce, stormed among his Achaean comrades. "Where is Paris, that coward? Let him face me and answer for the theft of my honor." Wild fury burned in him. The Greeks cheered. Their king was not merely wounded, but shamed. On the Trojan ramparts, Hector found his brother, staring at the turmoil below. "Paris," he hissed, voice iron-hard, "have you no shame, hiding while others bleed for your folly? Mount your armor, or forever be called craven among Troy's sons." Paris flushed, shame and pride colliding in his chest. With sudden resolve, he strode down to the walls and called aloud, "I will fight Menelaus alone, for Helen and her hand. Let this war end with blood between us, not thousands." The shouts of astonishment rippled through both camps. Menelaus, spear in hand, agreed at once. "I accept. Let the gods decide whose claim to Helen is just." Heralds ran between the lines, carrying the terms of duel to the death. Winner takes Helen, and the losing army must abandon its claim. Cheers and prayers filled the air. For a moment, hope flickered on both sides. Could this be the end of sorrow and siege? Priam, king of Troy, sat royal upon the battlements. Old but dignified, his eyes glistened with pain as Helen walked the walls above the battle. She grieved for all that had happened, while the city murmured about her beauty, marvel, and curse in equal measure. Paris, dressed in finest armor, gleaming bronze, a leopard's skin draped over his shoulders. Menelaus, his blood boiling, gripped his sword with both hands, swearing vengeance. The gods above watched, betting their pride on mortal deeds, Aphrodite smiling for Paris. Hera and Athena burning with anger for the Greeks. At the center, an open space was cleared. The armies ringed the field in a hush. Paris and Menelaus strode forward, eyes locked, and the world seemed to hold its breath. With a signal, the duel began. Menelaus leaped first, his bronze-tipped spear whistling past Paris' shield, drawing a thin line of blood. Paris replied, his own spear shattered against Menelaus's breastplate. Undaunted, Menelaus pressed forward, battering Paris' shield, striking him hard and dragging him by the helmet's crest. The Trojans gasped, the Greeks shouted. Helen's heart pounded like a trapped bird. Paris twisted, wrenching free as Menelaus' sword broke on his armor. Not to be stopped, Menelaus hurled himself upon Paris, fingers crushing his throat. It seemed the war would end in that moment with Paris dead, Helen returned, and the Greeks victorious. But the gods intervened. As Menelaus raised his dagger, Aphrodite cloaked Paris in mist, spiriting him away to the safety of his palace. Menelaus stood alone, clutching a broken helmet, roaring in rage at the heavens. Confusion dissolved into fury. The Greeks believed Menelaus had won, justice on their side, but the Trojans knew the truth. Atop Olympus, gods quarreled, each staking pride on their chosen heroes. Helen, summoned by Aphrodite, found Paris alive in their chamber. She looked at him humbled, uncertain, but still beautiful, languor and sorrow battling in her eyes. "Why do you shrink from death while others fight for you?" she asked, voice hushed but fierce. Paris reached out, but Helen turned away, heart heavy with regret. Back on the field, Agamemnon shouted, demanding Helen and peace, but the deal was undone by divine interference. The lines reformed. The bitter war would continue. Thus, in a single duel, the tragedy deepened a war for one woman, with gods as puppeteers and men as pawns. The promise of peace, bright as a morning star, faded once more into blood and dust. Chapter 5. The Gods Take Sides. Above the plains where armies gathered and kings clashed, a different battle rumbled across luminous halls of Olympus. The fates of mortals were pondered, gambled, and decided by beings ancient as the world itself, gods who loved, envied, and sometimes despised the fragile creatures below. When the dust settled after Paris's duel, the Olympians grew restless. The war that began for Helen's beauty now twisted with pride and rivalry, not just among humans, but through the heavens themselves. In a golden palace, atop cloud and thunder, Zeus, Lord of gods and men, summoned council. His booming voice echoed across marble and mountain, summoning gods from the farthest corners. White-armed Hera swept in, her fury cold as the morning frost. Beside her, Gride Athena came, resolve glittering like a drawn blade. And, on the other side, Aphrodite rosy, radiant, forever entwined with Paris's fate. Zeus looked down on Troy and its battered plains. Lines of spears gleamed in the sun, banners fluttered above breastplates, and from his seat he could see into every tent, every heart. He felt the prayers of both sides, desperate and honest, and knew that war would not end quickly. Pride demanded otherwise. Hera was first to speak, her voice edged with bitterness. "Son of Cronus, how long will you allow this crime to stand? Paris, your pampered darling, escapes judgment thanks to Aphrodite's meddling. Have you forgotten all the oaths the Greeks made, calling you as witness? Will you reward the faithless and punish the faithful?" Aphrodite sneered, her words as sweet as honey and cold as marble. "Have you forgotten love's power, Hera? Helen and Paris are bound by my will. Is it not your wrath and Athena's jealousy that stirs the Greeks into endless bloodshed? Would you break every heart before ending one quarrel?" Athena, never one to yield, stepped forward. "I stand for honor, not petty lust. Menelaus was the victor, Paris should lie cold beneath the Trojan walls. If the Greeks lose hope now, Troy will become a monument to pride and betrayal." Zeus raised a mighty hand, bidding silence. In his heart, he favored Troy's son, Sarpedon, would fight for her, and the city's walls were built by God's own hands. But he knew the balance was fragile. If he openly favored one side, the quarrels of Olympus might set the universe itself ablaze. "Let each of you help your chosen, but do not shatter the fate woven long ago," Zeus decreed. "I will watch, and only intervene when destiny requires it. Let men prove their worth, and kings learn their lessons." So Olympus divided, heaven mirroring earth. Hera and Athena promised aid to the Greeks, filling hearts with cunning and resolve. Aphrodite lent her charms and subtle whispers to Troy. Apollo, the far-striking archer, also sided with the Trojans his silver bow, ready to rain destruction on those who crossed him. Elsewhere, Poseidon, lord of the sea, watched with restlessness. He bore old grudges against Troy, remembering the unpaid debt of the city. He would tilt the tide at the moment of his choosing. Down on the plains of war, men felt the gods' moods like a change in the wind. Armor shone brighter, feet moved faster. Courage or terror bubbled in the marrow of their bones, depending on which immortal favored them that hour. That night, as fires flickered in camp and sentinels whispered legends, omens filled the air. Owls cried from the darkness where Athena walked unseen. A gentle, unseen hand brushed Paris's cheek in his sleep, Aphrodite's reassurance. But in the Greek camp, Agamemnon tossed and turned, his mind gnawed by doubt. Odysseus dreamed he walked among stars, given secrets by a veiled goddess. Even bold Ajax found his heart restless, eager for combat and glory. Dawn would come soon, and with it, a new surge of battle, each spear thrust, each arrow loosed, watched from above by gods who made war their play and mortals their pieces. As the sky pinked over the Trojan plain, it was clear the real war was only just beginning, and every fate would be woven from tangled threads of divine desire. Chapter 6. The Trojans attack, Hector's strength. With dawn's first pale light bleeding over the plain, the air above Troy throbbed with anticipation. The city's 12 wide gates stood open, and from within poured an endless wave of warriors, bronze armor blazing, horses winning, banners snapping. Priam's sons led the charge, but at their head shone one hero brighter than the rest: Hector, breaker of horses, pride of Troy, and hope of every trembling heart behind the city's walls. Hector strode from the Sihon gate, his armor poetraught and stained from earlier battles. Beside him, Aeneas, noble yet haunted, nodded grimly. Paris came too, but hung back from the front lines, haunted by memories of his failed duel. The Trojans, newly emboldened by the night's council of elders and the gods' quiet encouragement, seized this day for assault. High above, Apollo watched, warming Hector's limbs and steadying his hand. As the Trojans ran, their sandaled feet thundered across the plain. A living tide to throw itself against the Greek trenches, the ditch of doom dug deep for defense. Inside the Greek camp, the withdrawal of Achilles was keenly felt. His myrmidons stood unused, murmuring, frustrated, their leader brooding alone by the shore. Still, the other great captains did not yield. Agamemnon's iron command rang out, ordering lines to ready spears and shield walls. The battle began with a fury that shook the dawn itself. The Trojans stormed Hector at the tip of their spear. He roused courage with firm, stirring words. "Remember your wives, your children, the altars of our fathers. Today, we drive the invaders into the wind-dark sea, or die before the walls we swore to defend." His voice was a banner, lifting faint hearts. Aeneas answered him, "Together we stand. No Greek is half a man while Hector leads us." First blood came quickly. Hector's spear drove through the shield of Menestheus, sending him reeling. Next, Sarpedon, most valiant of Zeus's sons, rushed the ramparts, smashing at the walls as arrows rained down from both sides. The clang of bronze on bronze echoed across the plain. Swords flashed, men shouted, dying for glory, for love, for their city or their commandante. On the Greek side, leaders like Diomedes and Ajax held their ground, rallying troops, hurling boulders or spears as the Trojans pressed close. Nestor, wise and unyielding despite his age, rode his chariot along the lines, urging the young to bravery and the wounded to return to the fray. Yet no man challenged Hector's might that day. Clad head to foot in bright bronze, he drove the wedge deeper, his spear flashing, his shield battered but never broken. The gods watched, unseen, but ever presented Apollo's invisible shield guiding Hector, while Athena whispered tactics in Greek commanders' dreams. At one frantic moment, Hector and Ajax the giant Telamonian met face to face. Their weapons clashed with the force of ancient trees falling. Spears shattered, shields buckled, but both stood unbowed, each earning the other's respect. For a heartbeat, the world paused around the two champions. Then, at the last, night's approach forced a truce, and both sides gathered their dead, haunted by what the morrow would bring. Back at the city gates, Hector's name was sung, his deeds recounted beside fires. Inside Troy, Andromache his wife waited with trembling hands, her prayers soaring higher than arrows. For every victory, she knew, was paid with the risk of never returning. Even in the Greek camp, hearts shuddered at the Trojans' ferocity. Agamemnon scowled, his pride wounded. Odysseus pondered new plans, and Ajax, still gripping his battered shield, spoke softly to his closest friends, "No man is a god, but Hector comes close." As night fell and the torches flickered low, both armies licked their wounds and sharpened their fears. But all agreed on one thing: the war had changed. While Achilles stayed away, it was Hector's name that ruled the day, and even the gods took notice. Far above, Zeus smiled his inscrutable smile, knowing this was only the first of many such days, and the suffering of heroes had only just begun. Chapter 7. Hector returns to Troy. Evening fell across the plain of Troy with a cool hush and a sky streaked by crimson. The shouts of battle faded, the clangor of bronze dulled to the moans of wounded men, the low chant of priests, and the crackling of countless waters. For a moment, the gods seemed to hold back their breath as both armies tended to pain and sorrow. Inside the city, every alley throbbed with tales of the day's battle. Mothers listened at the ramparts for news, children pressed their faces to the lattice, and old men argued destiny in every shadowed doorway. But all Troy ached for the same thing: a glimpse of Hector, their shield, their hope. At last, as stars formed above the walls, Hector returned. He passed through the mighty Sion gate, armor streaked with dust, face drawn but unbowed. Around him, his people thronged, reaching for his touch, shoving offerings of bread and wine into his arms, eyes shining with gratitude and fear. He accepted none of their gifts. His mind was heavy with tomorrow's dangers. First, he sought his mother, Hecuba. In her arms, he was for a moment a child, again her only wish, that his fate might be kinder. She pressed honeyed wine on him, but Hector refused. "Not yet, mother. My hands are stained with war. Before joy or rest, I must seek out the heart of our sorrow and our hope." He moved through the palace, past the doors, where Priam, his father, the aged king, waited atop the steps. Tears glittered in the old man's eyes, a mixture of pride and dread. "My son," Priam spoke in quavering tones, "the city breathes in rhythm with your footsteps. But always remember, even the mightiest oak falls to the axe of fate. Beware the night and beware the gods, whose tempers men may never appease." Hector knelt and touched his father's hand. "Had I power over fate, I would spare Troy every wound. But while I live, father, I will not let our people see me falter." News of the day's truce spread. In the courtyards, Helen herself, beautiful, enigmatic, shadowed by guilt and longing, waited to greet Hector. She lowered her eyes as she spoke. "Brother, I wish I had never set foot in Troy. This war burns for me, yet I am powerless to end it. Forgive me for this curse I bring." With a gentle strength, Hector raised her face to the light. "Do not bear all the blame. The hearts of men and gods are rivers deeper than we can ever know. Be at peace for tonight, Helen. Let tomorrow's sorrow wait for the dawn." Last, Hector sought the deepest chamber, where Andromache waited beside their small son. There, the world paused. His wife's arms trembled as they encircled him. The child clung silently to the plumes of his battered helmet. In that small circle of firelight, there was only family till the memory of war invaded once more. Andromache's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Hector, your courage is our city's heart, but you are my world and our son's only shield. Please, do not dare all for glory. Find a place at the back. Live to be a father, not merely a legend." Hector's hand lingered at her cheek. "My dearest, I would spare you every sorrow if the gods willed it. Yet, shame before Troy's men weighs heavier than even death. If I retreat, how can they trust any wall, any promise? Our fate is in the gods' hands, but a man must still choose honor." He lifted little Astyanax, smiled through the ache in his soul. "May you grow strong and see a peaceful Troy. But if not, remember, your father fought not for pride, but for the love of all within these walls." After a long embrace, Hector donned his helmet again and stepped out onto the ramparts. There, by starlight, he looked westward, beyond the watchfires of the encamped Greeks. By his side, Troy stood, battered but unbroken. Above, the gods watched, their own hearts moved by the courage and the doom they had sown. As the city slept, Hector's shadow lay long on the stones. In his stride, all Troy found hope. In his heart, a man faced sorrow, courage, and the coming storm. Chapter 8. The Erymanthian Boar. After releasing Artemis's sacred hind, Hercules left Tiryns to receive his next challenge from King Eurystheus. "You must capture alive the Erymanthian boar and bring it back to me." This monstrous wild boar had sown terror across the slopes of Mount Erymanthus. With its brute strength, thick hide, and tusks sharp as swords, no one dared face it. Trappers and hunters alike had lost their lives merely approaching the fearsome creature. Hercules set out, trekking through mist-shrouded forests and valleys ravaged by the boar's rampage. In these villages, people built wooden barricades, and children trembled in their homes each night when the beast's grunts echoed from the depths of the woods. Along the way, Hercules stopped by the cave of an old friend, Pholus, the centaur, wise and gentle, living among fragrant orchids in a rocky mountain cavern. Pholus welcomed Hercules with wild bread, sweet wine, and spoke of the boar. "We fear its savage strength, but remember it too is just a creature cornered by mankind." During their feast, other centaurs arrived to join the celebration. Unfortunately, an argument broke out over Dionysus's sacred wine. Chaos ensued, and the visiting centaurs fled. While in the struggle, Pholus was accidentally wounded by an arrow poisoned with Hydra's venom from Hercules, who wished only to protect his friend from the rioting centaurs. Heartbroken, Hercules laid Pholus to rest and promised to complete his task and dedicate his prize to the gods as atonement. The next day, Hercules climbed the snowy slopes of the mountain. The cold bit deep. In that pale, silent forest, the boar's bellow rang out. It appeared like a giant phantom re-dyed and with gleaming ivory tusks slashing the snow as it dug for food. Hercules, choosing not to use weapons, relied instead on his raw strength. Gradually, he herded the wild boar into a deep snowdrift. When the frenzied beast charged, he dodged skillfully, then threw a heavy net over it, wrestling it into submission after a fierce struggle. Finally, Hercules bound the monster with stout oxhide ropes. He dragged the boar back down the mountain, all the way to the gates of Tyrans. The king's courtiers and the townsfolk were horrified by the sight. This creature was larger than a man, its tusks able to pierce armor. King Eurystheus, terrified, hid in a bronze jar for safety, making everyone around him stifle their laughter. Honoring his promise to his old friend, Hercules treated the boar kindly and released it back into the wilds, restoring nature's fragile balance. One more labor completed. Yet Hercules found no rest, for his tasks would only grow harder, more dangerous, and more relentless. Chapter 9. Agamemnon's Despair and the Embassy to Achilles, a nightmare, had fallen across the Greek front lines, now that Hector's rampage had become cruel reality. Night smothered the camp, their fires sputtered in the wind, and soldiers whispered of fate, of the one hero they desperately needed, but who kept himself apart, Achilles, son of Peleus. Agamemnon, king of kings, now truly felt the crushing weight of defeat. He trudged through the ranks of wounded men, their faces drawn with despair. The wind carried whispers of curses and blame for how he had insulted Achilles, losing the Greek army's invincible edge. Unable to bear it any longer, Agamemnon summoned those heroes still standing: wise Odysseus, mighty Ajax, and old sagacious Nestor. They gathered in a shadowed corner of the camp, the flickering fire stretching their silhouettes like the dark shadows of fate itself. Nestor was the first to speak, his voice gravelly but commanding. Now is not the time for pride, Agamemnon. If Achilles does not return, our end is certain. Admit your error, set your pride aside, and beg him to fight for us once more. Agamemnon sat in silence, and then nodded bleakly. I have erred. Bring gold and spoils. Bring my apology words. I've never spoken to any man. Go to Achilles' tent and beg him to return, for the sake of us all. And so an embassy was chosen. Odysseus would lead, followed by Ajax, and by Phoenix, Achilles' old mentor. They walked through the hushed night, the stars seeming to mourn with every exhausted step of the Greeks' last hope. On the shore, Achilles' tent stood quiet and apart, like a world unto itself. The sound of waves and the cold moonlight fell upon the eyes of a hero, fiery with anger, bottomless with pain. Patroclus, his closest friend, met the envoys and brought them to Achilles. Odysseus spoke, his words both skillful and sincere. Achilles, the hearts of all Greeks are faltering. Many have fallen, and all are waiting for your sword. Agamemnon admits his fault, returns Briseis, offers untold spoils. If you will not come back for us, or for your own fame, then know that your name, too, could fade from mortal memory. Phoenix pleaded tearfully, I cradled you as a child, taught you of honor and love. My son, do not let Troy fall because of wounded pride. Ajax spoke bluntly. If you fear shame, then stand up for your brothers. Every man here counts your footsteps, Achilles. But Achilles, torn by pain and pride, refused. Gold will crumble to dust. Briseis can never erase the stain on my honor. My dignity has been torn to shreds. Let Agamemnon fight Hector. I will leave, seek peace in my homeland, for, even if we conquer Troy, How will this wound in my heart ever heal? In silence, the embassy returned to camp, hearts sagging with disappointment. They knew tomorrow could only bring deeper nightmares for the Greeks. With the heart of their army, Achilles still, frozen by pride and grief. That night, under dim starlight, the Greek army kept nervous watch, each soldier lost in his own thoughts. Within Achilles' tent, a small flame danced, glimmering in the deep eyes of the hero as he faced the greatest conflict of his life, rage and fate, honor and heartbreak. Chapter 10. Patroclus goes to war, and the tragedy at Hector's hands. At dawn, as the sun burned red above Troy's walls, the Greeks teetered on the edge of despair. Hector, like a thunderbolt sent by the gods, drove ever deeper into the Greek camp, setting their ships ablaze, threatening their only means of returning home. Inside Achilles' tent, the storm of emotion raged on. Patroclus, Achilles' dearest friend, more brother in soul than by blood, could no longer watch as comrades fell, one after another. Tears shining in his eyes, Patroclus pleaded, "My friend, if your reason will not let you return to battle, then let me wear your armor and fight in your place. Only the sight of Achilles in the field can save the Greeks now. Let me become your shadow before the enemy. Let me save our brothers." Achilles was silent for a long time. In his heart, he knew Patroclus spoke truth, even as his own grief and fury still burned. Compassion for his friend and the doomed warriors finally moved Achilles to nod. He handed Patroclus his gleaming, gold-embellished armor, the very armor crafted by Hephaestus. Achilles gave a grave warning. "Drive the Trojans from the ships, save our allies. But remember, do not pursue them to Troy's very gates. Do not defy fate. Return as soon as victory is within reach." Donning Achilles' war gear, Patroclus led the mighty Myrmidons into the thick of battle. With the gods lending their strength, the Greeks mistook Patroclus for Achilles himself. Their spirits blazed anew with hope. The return of Achilles sent panic through the Trojan ranks. Patroclus fought like a lion among sheep, pushing Hector back and saving the Greek ships from ruin. Many Trojan heroes fell before Patroclus' spear. Even Sarpedon's, son of Zeus, great commander from Lycia, was doomed by Patroclus' hand. But the taste of victory drove Patroclus beyond his limits. Drunk on battle, he ignored Achilles' warning and spurred his chariot after Hector, all the way to Troy's sacred walls. And there, at the city's very threshold, fate awaited him. Apollo, angered at Patroclus for daring too much, peered in a cloud of mist, struck the helmet from Patroclus' head, shattered his spear, and left him dazed and defenseless. At that moment, Hector rushed forward. With a single thrust, his spear pierced Patroclus' chest. In his final breath, Patroclus mourned not for himself, but that he would never see Troy fall, never embrace Achilles once more. He whispered, "Achilles will avenge me, Hector. Destiny will soon call you too." Hector, standing over Patroclus's body, felt strangely uneasy, no triumph in his heart. He stripped Achilles' shining armor from Patroclus, putting it on himself as a trophy for Troy, unaware that this act would summon the storm of Achilles' wrath. In the Greek camp, the news of Patroclus' death spread like wildfire. Achilles, upon seeing the blood-soaked body of his soul's brother, cried out, throwing dust onto his head, weeping with inhuman pain, swearing that not even the rage of the gods could match the fire of a grieving heart. Never before had the fate of Troy hung by such a fragile thread, as if the sky itself awaited a coming storm. Chapter 11. Achilles' return and the fateful duel with Hector. Since Patroclus had fallen, Clouds seemed to hang low over the Greek camp. Achilles, son of the sea goddess, Thetis, refused all food and drink, burying himself in wild grief and fury. His cries of anguish echoed across the battlefield. No one could recognize the invincible hero he once was, now consumed only by burning friendship and vengeful rage. From the depths of the sea, Thetis appeared, beholding her son in utter despair. In his divine mother's embrace, Achilles begged for only one thing: "Mother, grant me new weapons, so I may avenge my friends, so the wound in my heart may stop bleeding for Thetis rose to Olympus and pleaded with Hephaestus, the godly blacksmith, to forge Achilles a new set of armor dazzling as fire, fearsome as fate itself. At dawn, beneath the blazing light, Achilles donned the new armor and returned to the battlefield. The fury in his eyes rekindled hope among the Greeks, while the Trojans shook in terror as if facing death itself. "No one, not even gods or men, will stop me from killing Hector," Achilles thundered, his voice resounding like storm clouds. The Greek army rallied, driving the Trojans back against their own walls. Hector, shielded by Apollo, still fought bravely, but in his heart, he knew the decisive moment had come. From atop the city walls, Hector's parents, wife, and child watched every step of their champion. Priam, the aged king, wept, so many sons already lost, and now perhaps the very light of Troy at risk. Andromache, Hector's wife, held her small son close, trembling with dread at the darkness looming over their family. As dusk approached and the Trojans broke for the city, Hector remained alone before the Scion gate, determined to face Achilles' challenge. The two heroes faced each other, Achilles with eyes blazing with hate and Hector heavy with concern. Hector thought of his family, his honor, and spoke to Achilles. "If I fall, please return my body to my parents. And if the gods will it, I shall do the same for you and return your body to the Greeks." But Achilles only shook his head. "There is no room for mercy. Only blood can soothe the pain in my heart." The duel began. Hector fled 3 times around the ancient walls, but at last turned to face fate itself. Athena, this time siding with Achilles, disguised herself as Hector's brother to trick him into stopping. In a flash, Achilles' spear burst through Hector's armor. The greatest hero of Troy fell in the dust. With his last breath, Hector pleaded for his body to be returned to his family, but in madness and pain, Achilles bound Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it around the city walls, sowing endless grief among the people of Troy. The entire city drowned in tears. Priam and Hecuba collapsed upon the walls. Andromache fainted beside their son, every heart shattered, not only for the loss of Hector, but because the last light of Troy had been extinguished. Though the victory blazed bright, Achilles found no peace, only tears, ashes, and laments echoed between earth and sky. And even the gods, far above mankind, gazed down and understood. This tragedy was a harsh finale for both mortals and immortals alike. Chapter 12. Priam begs Achilles for Hector's body. Night fell over Troy, bringing with it a heavy darkness of mourning. Gone were the songs, and music only, the sound of weeping echoed under roofs that once sang Hector's name. In Achilles' tent, deep within the Greek camp, Hector's body still lay tied to the war chariot. Every turn of the wheels left a new wound upon Troy, upon honor, and upon Achilles' own heart, even if he refused to acknowledge it. But above all else, the deepest pain belonged to Priam, the aged king, now in his 80s, who had lost so many children, and now the last light of his life. All night he tossed and turned, his tears long since dried up, and only one thought remained. He must bring his son home at any cost. With the aid of Hermes, Priam quietly slipped out of Troy, carrying gold and precious gifts, crossing through enemy lines and walking straight into Achilles' tent. The Greek soldiers were shocked. The lone old man, white-haired and bent with years, bearing a weight heavier than any sword or spear. Entering the tent, Priam knelt before Achilles. Casting aside any thought of kingship or honor, he was simply a father facing the man who had killed his son. Looking up, tears streaming down his face, Priam pleaded in agony, "Achilles, remember your own father, also old and gray, waiting back home, praying for your safety and return. I am even more wretched, for my son is dead by your hand, and his body lies in foreign dust. Have mercy, let me have his body back. Let me hold my child one last time. Let me give him a human burial." Achilles, faced with the image of his own father and the king's broken heart, felt his emotions thaw and rush forth. The fire of his rage was cooled by the deeper pain he recognized in Priam, echoing his own loss of Patroclus. Achilles wept, weeping together with the old king. One morning, the friend lost to wrath, the other, a son, lost to war. After some time, Achilles gently lifted Priam to his feet. "Old man, in this world only suffering is eternal. The gods grant both joys and sorrows to mortal men, and tears to all. Let me return Hector's body, so some part of our pain might be eased. I too hope my father will never endure this grief." Together, they prepared Hector's body for burial. Achilles himself lifted the prince's corpse onto a cart, providing fine linen and gold, ensuring Hector could return to his family with honor. In that moment, on a blood-soaked battlefield, all rivalry faded. There was only shared humanity and tears. Priam returned to Troy with Hector's body. When the gates opened, the entire city broke into sobs. Hecuba collapsed before her son's remains. Andromache reached for her husband's blood-stained helmet. Grief, love, and sorrow mingled into the most mournful dirge of fate. Both Greeks and Trojans paused their war, joining in Hector's funeral, the pride of Troy, an immortal hero in the hearts of his people. Incense rose to the ancestors. Darkness settled again over Troy, marking a wound that would never heal in every heart. The Iliad draws to a close here, not with absolute victory, but with humanity rising above hatred, with a father's tears and a hero desperate for something greater than war.